How do we create an SVG? SVGs can be created by hand, or they can be created in vector editing software such as Inkscape, Adobe Illustrator, or Sketch. For the purposes of this course, we will use Adobe Illustrator since it's probably the most widely used. To begin, open up a new document. Then add some vector shapes and paths to create some artwork. Then, when you're done, do a Save As. Control-Shift-S from the keyboard, or navigate to File, and then Save As. Then select SVG or SVGZ from the drop-down. Note that SVGZ is a gzipped version of the SVG file. Gzip compression will reduce the file size, but in this format we will no longer be able to read or edit the code. For the purposes of this course, we will use the SVG format. Next, you'll be presented with some options. The first of which is the SVG profile. You can leave this as SVG 1.1 since it's the version currently recommended by the W3C. For font type, we can ignore Adobe CEF since it's meant for use with Adobe SVG Viewer and may not be supported in targeted browsers. We will want either SVG or we want to convert our text to outlines. For those of you not familiar with converting type to outlines in Illustrator, it will create vector paths of the characters so that they no longer require fonts. This is acceptable if accessibility of the text is not a concern. For this example, we will use outlines. When using custom fonts, subsetting can be used to save only the glyphs needed to render the type into the SVG. Depending upon the options chosen, this can increase the file size. We're not going to get into the different subsetting options here because it's beyond the scope of this course. Sometimes your SVG will contain images. I've seen this occur when I've used something like an outer glow. During the SVG conversion, it will create images of the glow. In that case, if we leave the setting as link, it will create the outer glow as its own image that will be referenced externally from within the SVG. If we were to choose the embed option, instead it would base64 encode the image directly into the SVG code. When we're going to work with SVG code, we can simply hit the SVG code button. When the window pops up, we can then copy and paste the code from this file into our document. If we decide to use the SVG as an external image, we just need to hit the OK button, and this image will be saved. Like riding a bike with no training wheels, we can really flex our muscle and show off our skills by creating SVGs by hand. This can prove to be a significant challenge for more complex graphics, but for simpler ones, it can be a more efficient method. Let's take a look at a simple example. In this demo, we will see some new stuff, and if it's not clear to you, don't worry too much because we will be exploring SVG code in depth in the next module. To begin, navigate to any location within an HTML5 document and add an SVG tag. Let's say we want to add a circle that's 100 pixels in diameter. To do this, we need to add a height and width of 100 to our SVG. Then we need to add a circle element. This circle requires a center point and a radius to dictate its location and size within the SVG. All SVG elements have attributes that describe their position and how they should look. For the circle element, we need a CX, which represents the center of the circle along the x-axis. We also need a CY, which represents the center of the circle along the y-axis. And we will need an R, which represents the radius of the circle. So you can see that we have a CX of 50, a CY of 50, and an R of 50. And here's our circle with a 100 pixel diameter. You'll notice that by default, the SVG elements will be colored black. To change this, we can simply add a fill with the hexadecimal color for red to the circle. And here we can see that our circle is now red. And there we have it. We've created a simple SVG graphic by hand coding it from scratch. Next, let's take a look at how we can add SVGs to our site.